Good morning. My name is Brad Roeller. I'm the manager of Display Gardens, Grounds, and Visitation at the Institute of Ecosystem Studies in Millbrook, New York. I'm happy to be here to talk about perennial plants that show resistance to deer selecting them for food. It's a show that runs from A to Z based upon over 30 years of evaluation in our gardens on resistance to deer browsing. I've done work for over 30 years with deer in conjunction with scientists, ecologists, and things like this in pretty much all phases. Obviously, my interest is dealing with deer, methods of deterring deer from browsing in landscape plantings, and also kind of categorizing plants, both herbaceous and woody plants, insofar as any resistance that they might have to deer selecting them for food source. And when I usually start this talk out, I usually give a disclaimer. Plants that I recommend, products that I say may or may not work for you, because that is true. If there's one lesson I've learned, and I often entitle this talk or some of my deer talks Lessons Learned, is that there are no givens when it comes to deer. But one of the things that is very important is what I call biological and environmental indicators that are going to play a major role in what deer select for food and the intensity of browsing seasonally. One thing that I did for you in anticipation, there's a series of handouts. One large one has the deer-resistant perennials list on it. This comes from over 30 works of evaluation with looking at deer, and probably most of those at one point or the time have been browsed, but given over the long term, these are what I consider, and others, people like Dr. Perry up at UVM and Paul Curtis out at Cornell, consider some of the best perennials for our area for planting that deer don't like. Some of the other handouts, there's my woody plant list handout, and also a document that summarizes a 12-year funded grant study that I did with Cornell looking at categorizing plants that deer may not select for food, and also evaluating the effectiveness of a variety of means of deterring deer, everything from electric fencing and boxing plants in to spray-on repellents to gadgets and devices, and I've tried everything I think that's on the market. So that's summarized in there. But as I've mentioned, I've seen the best of repellents or the best of devices work when conditions are right. I've seen the best of repellents and the best of devices or gadgets fail, and fail miserably, when those environmental and biological indicators are there that make hungry deer in competition for food, approaching starvation, no amounts of repellents, no devices. They'll try to get through any sort of physical barrier that you're putting up. So as I say, this is not an easy topic, because I'm sure in some of the plants that you'll say, oh, they eat it down here, and yeah. What they eat in my landscape, they might turn their nose at in yours, and vice versa, based upon the availability of alternate food sources, the size of the herd, and things like this. Probably the biggest thing, obviously, is competition for food. What we call biological carrying capacity in the Northeast, in our area, the Hudson Valley, in a forest situation, forest and field situation, anybody, or another way to put it, how many deer, we measure densities in deer per square mile, can a forest or a ecosystem support before we start losing species and diversity gets affected and things like this? Anybody want to hazard a guess how many deer per square mile? Very close. It's anywhere from 10 to 15. Pre-European colonization of the Northeast, they figured there was about 6 to 10 deer per square mile, and this was not a problem. Anybody want to take a guess at what the current density in this area of Westchester County is insofar as deer per square mile? No. Up. Anyway, it varies. It varies. About 150. Yeah, and it's not uncommon. I've come into areas of the Northeast where we have insular deer herds that approach 200 deer per square mile. You can imagine In fact, I'm doing a study right now with a bunch of people looking at what we call urban versus rural deer, kind of taking a gradient from very lower Westchester County right on up through the Adirondacks and looking at deer densities and the intensity of herbivory on there. So, yeah, when we start exceeding densities greater than 15 to 20 deer per square mile, we start losing species. In my lifetime, I've seen species like Canadian yew, Taxus canadensis, Clintonia, Britain's Appalachian Jacob's ladder, several wildflowers, shrub species, and things like this are largely disappeared, especially from this area, due to one reason and one reason only: deer herbivory on there. So don't take notes. All this is on the web. You have some of my handouts. The web address is on one of your handouts and things like this. So let's go through some of the perennials, and I'll comment on these as I go. Can you grow Acacia here down in your zone 6 or 5 here? 6, yeah. You can grow this. It's a wonderful plant. As you can see, many of the deer-resistant plants are either armored, as this one is, or the woolly gray type of foliage and things like this. We use this. This is in our gardens. I have to protect this severely for winter injury and things like this, but it's a wonderful perennial plant, extremely deer-resistant. I've never had this plant in 20 years browsed, good times or bad times. Another one of my favorites, we can grow a couple of different species of acanthus bear britches there. There's even a native one that used to be in this area, rattlesnake master acanthus yuccifolium, I think. Yeah, but I grow belii and agavifolium in the gardens. Wonderful plants. These things in flower really wow you. The flowers are around all summer long, too, very long time. And again, kind of spiny, fleshy foliage. I have never had a problem with this in here. Kind of hard to get, kind of unusual. These last two are very unusual. You don't find them in your normal garden centers. Of course, you do find yarrows. Many of your herbs are, obviously, because of aromatic or essential oils in them, make them very deer resistant. And both the common yarrow and the garden yarrows are all pretty much deer resistant. Now, have I seen them browsed? Occasionally, but deer have to be pretty hard up before they select any of the yarrows. Monkshood. Many species of monkshood in flower right now in your gardens and things like this. Very poisonous plant, has alkaloids in it. I think that's what, even though deer eat a lot of poisonous plants, things like mountain laurels are poisonous, believe it or not, and yews are poisonous. They can tolerate a certain amount, but monkshood is deadly poisonous in there. That's another one. And I saw once in my life up in New Hampshire northern monkshood. That's one that's on the endangered list because of deer herbivory. But Carmicii, bicolor, all the other monkshoods are very deer resistant and put on quite a show with your fallen enemies and other things. An old-fashioned, ladybell's an old-fashioned garden plant. This was around in our grandparents' times and things like this. Quite a cedar if you have this in your garden, as you know. But it's a wonderful plant, pretty deer resistant. I have seen this browse, but not there. This is one of our wildflower meadows in front of our main administration building. And on the left, you see Agastache, the Anis hyssop, a biennial, pretty much short-lived perennial, but it reseeds very well. If you've ever smelled it or used it, you'll really enjoy it. Some people consider it a weed. Well, one person's weed is another person's wildflower. But one of the things that I've done in this garden, this was one of my test gardens, and one of the strategies that is in your handout is fronting your beds with more deer-resistant plants, things like Liatris you can see down there, echinaceas and agastaches and things like this, and putting more of the susceptible plants more in the interior sections. Is it foolproof? By no means, but it's a good strategy there. So one of my favorite plantings, we have a lot of pycnanthemums and things like this in there that really, and some native coreopsises. It's a beautiful wildflower meadow. In fact, it was in the August issue of Martha Stewart Living there. She needs some photographs of there. Well, Not one of my favorites, but pretty resistant. I will skip right by ajugas there. Hollyhocks, hollyhocks. Now everybody says, I have hollyhocks and the deer eat my hollyhocks. Yeah, they do in some cases. I grow many different hollyhocks. I'm not, rust diseases and Japanese beetles are the two real problems with hollyhocks, and if you can deal with them, so be it. But hollyhocks put on quite a display, obviously, and are pretty doggone deer resistant as well. Alyssums, all your alyssums, sweet alyssums and things like this, very resistant. Another old-fashioned perennial plant that's been in gardens and things like this. Amsonias, native plants down to the south and southwest part, Oklahoma through Texas and that area. Tabernet montana, illustris. Anybody grow Hubectrii? It's one of a perennial that we select for fall color. It's beautiful. This is probably the most common Tabernet montana. Excellent plant, tougher than nails. If you've ever seen it in the wild, growing in prairie communities, it has to be drought tolerant and everything else, and very, very deer resistant. Very rarely do I see this browse. Nice combination. I will combine this with one of the non-invasive polygolas. Pink flowers makes a real nice combination. But Amsonias, blue stars. Anemones. We grow anemones. I have collected wild anemones from Asia, and of course our native anemones, canadensis, and things like this. Anemones are pretty resistant as well. Big class of plants, as I say, and right now, of course, all the hupahensis and all the robustas are all in full flower. Angelica, native plant, poisonous plant, lowland bottom plant that we've been growing. This is it in our garden. There's Angelica. Anybody grow Angelica gigas? That purple leafed, in the spring of the year, the leaves are very purple. The stems and flowers are all purple and things like this. This is in one of our perennial beds up there. Angelica is not a long-lived perennial, but it reseeds, so it's there. If you go for the native one, is big, 6 feet, down in swamps and lowlands and things like this. Gigas is very good, short-lived though, but it does reseed in there. Very poisonous. Alkaloids again in the foliage. I've never ever seen deer eat Angelica. Pussy toes, Antenarias. Some of your used a lot in rock gardens, obviously. There's 3 or 4 native Antenarias in here. They like what I call our Dutchess County topsoil, gravelly, shale, infertile, slightly acidic soils. But pussy toes are very good. We use both native and cultivated ones in our rock gardens, in our xeriscape gardens up there. Very resistant. Again, the quintessential gray, woolly foliage that deer just seem not to like. The perennial marguerite, of course, a lot of your members of the daisy family are pretty resistant. They're not totally resistant, and they do get browsed. If you have mums out in your fall mums and things, you'll notice that they'll take those damn flower heads off on you. But they're pretty resistant, and this is one that I use quite a bit in bedding and up at the gardens. Columbines, I have, of course, our native columbines, the western columbines and the northern columbines. I like them all. Some are more resistant to the leaf miner than others that I found. I'm kind of evaluating those and things like this. But Aquilesias are very resistant. Rarely do I have them done. I love them in the shade garden, real harbingers of spring, and combine them with all sorts of native shade-loving plants in there. Reseed well, too, obviously. In our xeriscape garden, well, traditional, what I'll call rock garden plants, your sedums and sempervirums and arabises and antenarias and these type of things, but we're showing a lot of other plants in that garden. But arabis, your cresses, again, early spring, harbingers of springs, very deer resistant, never have a problem with any of the arabises on there. Oh, by the way, I'll mention now is that I'm kind of glossing over the attributes and combinations and things like this. All this information is on the website. Many of these plants coincidentally happen to be what I term my low-maintenance perennial plants. I have 5 criteria for getting on the A list, if you will, things like drought tolerance, low fertility needs, disease and pest resistance, long-lived, non-invasive, and good garden plants, obviously, deer resistant and things like this. And there I give on that on the website much more information about the individual plants and things like this. Your arenarias, your sandworts, again, in our rock gardens, we use them a lot. Love them in flume. They're just very floriferous, and I've never had a problem with deer eating those. Our native jack-in-the-pulpits. Of course, I have both the native and anybody have Cicocaneum, the Asian ones that are just gorgeous, very iridescent, spathe, the pulpit, if you will. Wonderful plants. Always look for these. There's a lot of variation. Some of the cultivars that have come out of there, believe it or not, they're starting to hybridize. A lot of variation in natural populations. This is one that I found down in a section, not too far from Millbrook, that has a snow white spathe and a mottled leaf, which is kind of nice. So always look on this. I probably could have retired if I've introduced into the trade some of the plants that I found in the wild. Especially, I had a native sunflower, a woodland sunflower that had a red halo and a red petiole to the flower stalks that I put in our gardens and collected seed and gave away at our plant sales and stuff like this. Well, wouldn't you know it, White Flower Farm introduced it to big fanfare about a year or two ago, so I missed the opportunity. Your sea thrifts, armerias, again, great plants. Remember, drainage, drainage, drainage on many of these kind of rock garden plants, arenarias, armerias, things like this. When I plant these, I use chipped stone as a backfill just to have very good, what they call sharp drainage down through them. Wonderful plants, edge of the borders, little tiny guys, little puffs of foliage there, but extremely deer resistant. Never had deer bother my thrifts at all. Artemisias, of course, native plants, all the sages and mugworts and things like this. You probably all have silver mound and silver king and white sages and things like this. Obviously, pubescent, downy, gray foliage. Anybody ever had a Artemisia browse? No, I haven't. Goat's beard. Love goat's beard. A native plant, by the way. This is in our garden. This one gets up about chest high or so. There's a little dwarf one that only gets about 6 inches too that we have. I can't remember this species. This is Dioicus, the native there. Some people call it false astilbe. It has that astilbe thing. Long flowering, excellent, tough perennials. This is on my low maintenance perennial list. It made the cut, if you will, and very, very deer resistant. Maybe once in all the years I've been growing aruncuses around the properties and in landscapes I've seen it browse there. Gingers. The evergreen ones like this is probably Europeum or Shuttleworthii or one of the evergreen ones, as opposed to deciduous like our native Cerum canadensis. The evergreen ones seem to be less browsed than the deciduous, the native one, but we love them. This is in our ground cover bed. We show some of our favorite ground covers, and this is the European one, I'm pretty sure. Rarely browsed. I mean, they really have to go through a whole list of other plants before they'll even think about browsing my gingers. Milkweeds. Obviously, your butterfly weed, tuberosa, out in your blue stem meadows and things like this. I've become a real fan of the milkweeds, and I've put in swamp milkweed. In my other shows where I'm showing more perennials for landscaping type of things, I've got swamp milkweed with a burgundy red flower heads and things like this. There's another one called purpurascens, the big leaves, fleshy leaves, and a beautiful pink flower. And of course the butterfly weed, the traditional one that a lot of people see. And the cultivars, there's from pure yellow to orange and things like this. Very, very deer resistant. The only thing with these, as you know, I've never successfully moved one. They resent disturbance, and they also drainage. If you put them in heavy loam soils or heavy clay soils, they will not perform well at all. They like the gravelly, sharp drainage. And well, part of our low maintenance perennial bed, yeah, I can see astilbes over on the right. That's a big Asian astilbe called Astilbe taquetii. Cultivar superba, this gets up about waist high. All the astilbes, both the ardesii, the conventional ones, the simplicifolias, the real small cut leaf ones, the Asian ones like taquetis and some of the others. Sure, they get browsed from time to time. but very deer resistant. Didn't make my low maintenance perennial list. Astilbes require a lot of water and need a lot of fertilizer to really perform, and those are two criteria that in the old days I used to say water's cheap and fertilizer's cheap, but in today's day and age when you have water restrictions, and boy, we're having a pretty dry time as we speak, at least up in my neck of the woods, and the problems associated with inorganic fertilizers make those two criteria that I'm kind of not advocating, if you will. Masterwort, another one of the old-fashioned perennials from our grandparents' times. They're used a lot in dried flowers, of course. I like Astrantia. There's some great cultivars of Astrantia, some of the more purple and pink cultivars there. Very easy to grow. This is on my low maintenance list as well, and it's very deer resistant in there. Oh, just as well, come on here. There we go. While I'm thinking of it, I've done a few studies, and others have as well, with fertilized plants and non-fertilized plants, and there's no doubt about it, especially with nitrogen fertilizer. The more fleshy nitrogen type of forced growth that you have, the more browsing you're going to have in controlled situations. So there's another reason for finding low fertility plants. We do not use fertilizers in our gardens. I'm using compost and aerated compost teas, which do have some NPK in it, but I'm not using conventional Miracle Grows or whatever. Basket of growth, Arinias, another common perennial in the perennial garden. I like it. It's not on my low maintenance list. It's not as long lived as I would like it to see, but it is very, very deer resistant and does quite well. Baptisias, I like all the Baptisias. Native plants, nitrogen fixing, legume, will actually improve the soil. This is one of the plants that, for tough spots and things like this, I do this. I like it. I like our native ones, and I like the cultivated ones as well. So your Baptisias are very resistant. Bergenias, member of the saxifrage family, another alpine type of plant, big, beautiful, fleshy foliage that takes on that burgundy color with the weather. Wonderful early spring flowering when the bulbs are in flower, and very, very deer resistant. Rarely have I had my Bergenias. Boltonias, some people call them false asters. That's snowbank probably. I love them. They're still in flower now. I have a whole bank of them across our arbor, and I can see how they get the name snowbank because it looks like a bank of snow there. Very floriferous, very tough, a great plant related to your asters in there. Brunneras, all your Siberian bug losses, variegated ones, the non-variegated ones, early spring, great reseeders. We won't go on and on. Very, very deer resistant, your Brunneras. Campanulas, this is our native harebell. I grow all the different campanulas, from the little blue chips to the common ones. This is our native. I'm becoming a big fan of this. This is one of the toughest perennials of all the campanulas. Kind of lacks foliage. You have to grow it amongst other things, but a great plant. Very, very deer resistant too. There's the Carpathian harebell as well that we grow. Your knapweed, centurias, I like. These things have naturalized. You often see these out amongst roadsides and fields and things like this now. But your knapweeds, there's some wonderful ones in the garden. Very, again, made the cut in all the years that I've been looking at that things. Centranthus rubra, your Jupiter's beard, one of Sidney Edison's favorite plants. Anybody know Sidney Edison? Yeah, see, this is in every of her gardens there. Great plant, excellent perennial for combining in mixed borders and things like this, and again, shows very good deer resistance. Snow and summer, Cerastium is another one that we use in our rock gardens and xeriscape beds, very this. One of my favorite ground covers. This doesn't really do it justice because it's not taking on the foliage coloration as the season progresses, but leadwort, great ground cover for the shade. This is in our gardens someplace there. Turtleheads, both the glabra and lione, native plants. Very adaptable. Turtleheads, as you probably know, grow in floodplains, pond sides, stream sides. That's right next to an oak tree. I like to kind of put them where they don't belong just to see how drought tolerant they are. They are. One thing that is a little problem with chelonis, if you don't have good air movement, they are susceptible to powdery mildew. But pretty deer resistant and quite a neat plant on there. Chrysanthemums already talked about in there. Your bug banes. That's Atropurpureum and things like this are native bug banes. You know how it gets its name there. And if you've, until I learned what was in flower, I was kicking my dog when I walked by my border of native ones. I must admit that the Asian ones, Acerina and some of the Asian ones, which are bloom about a month later than the native, and the cultivars, all these ones like brunette and black lace and these kind of things, are wonderfully fragrant and bloom a little bit later. And if you go for the purple-leafed ones, the best one by far, I've checked them all out, is Var Atropurpurea. That'll get up about shoulder high. The other ones will not, like pink spires and brunette, and though there's half a dozen of them now, will not get up that good. Very resistant to deer browsing. As is Lily of the Valley, one of my favorite native for ground covers, grow any place. I'm a big fan of tick seeds. I just got back from North Dakota, and I like to see a lot of my favorite plants. I have an affinity towards prairie plants. If they can deal with the conditions of the northern Great Plains, boy, put them in garden beds and stand back. Coreopsis fits into this bill. The threadleaf, the common, the rosea, the pink ones, and all these type of things. Moonbeam, goldfink, zagreb, all these others. Very, very resistant. Great native plants. Don't treat them well. They thrive on, don't fertilize them, things like this. Avoid some of the cultivars of rosea, like anybody buy Lime Rock Ruby? They're not hardy at all. Go with the species. Anybody grow Coryllitis? Yeah, European, although there is a native Coryllitis, which a biennial, but most of the ones that we're seeing are either Asian or Eurasian. The pink and purple ones are mainly Asian. This is European. They're kind of shunned at over in Europe as a weed. I love them. When they're in bloom all summer long. They reseed. They show up in little cracks in walls and rocks. Great plant and very, very deer resistant. Crocosmia, Lucifer's what? Just something crossover, Montpellier. Very good. Not one of my favorite plants. Very susceptible to thrips if you grow a lot of it. And in my zone, Zone 5, I got to protect it. But if you've seen it, that doesn't do it justice. Most blood red in flower, great combinations in there. Ice plant, again, very, very resistant. All your pinks. I grow a variety of different pinks, cheddar pinks and all the others, and obviously they are very resistant as well. Bleeding hearts, one of my favorites are fringe bleeding hearts. That's Dutchman's breeches, squirrel corn, your fringe bleeding heart, the one that repletes blooming, and even your great bleeding hearts, the Asian ones that spring ephemeral, by August they're completely gone, but very, 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 very deer resistant. And I'm becoming a bigger fan of some of the native ones like Dutchman's breeches and squirrel corn, much more so. Dictymus. Anybody grow dictymus? One of my favorite perennials. I amaze my kids in the summer by, puffing the matches or the lighters by these oils and things like this. Resents disturbance, but some great ones. There's white ones. There's some cultivars that are kind of pinkish and things like this. But wonderful perennial, and very deer resistant. It's one of my favorite perennials. Your foxgloves, obviously, your perennial foxgloves. Shooting star, another native member of the lily family, a harbinger of spring. We combine these. That's taken in my epimedium beds. I grow a lot of things. Right now, fall flowering crocus is in flower, and I have shooting stars and some minor bulbs in the spring and let them grow right up through the epimediums. Works out quite well. Doronicums, another harbinger of spring. I mean, this is in bloom in April for us. Very shade tolerant. This is one of a composite. This is one of the more shade tolerant of the perennials there. I love it in my shade bed. It does most of its growth, sets flower buds really long as the canopy is starting to fill out, so it's adapted itself to more shade. They'll take some sun too, obviously, but rarely can you grow composites in a shade garden. Echinaceas, what can I say about your coneflowers? My gosh, are they hybridizing these? Some of them I don't like, some of the new ones, but pretty resistant. Echinops, your globe thistles, great ones. I love to leave up for winter interest for seed sources and things like this. Retro, and there's 2 or 3 different species, and cultivars like Taplows Blue and all these other ones are very resistant. Great combining in the mixed borders, real fun. Epimediums I've already talked about. I've got a nice variety of epimediums collected wild. Our plant collectors were the first collectors in, well, at that time, the Soviet Union and Red China, and we brought back things like epimediums and rogersias and triceratuses and all these Asian plants, and we're enjoying them long before they became popular in the American gardens. Aramis, another one of my favorite plants. It's not on my, it's hard for me to grow as far as hardiness, but in flower it's just gorgeous, very resistant to this. That's in our fern glen, our native plant garden, Origeron. That's one of the fleabanes, daisy fleabane or one of them. Composite, of course, and very resistant to this. Ringiums, your sea hollies, we have these. They reseed quite easily. As if you grow them, you probably know that. Wonderful plant. If you know the foliage, you'll know why it's not selected for food. Your Ericiums, your Siberian wallflowers, also very resistant. Our native trout lilies, and even the Asian ones. If you really want a spectacular trout lily, grow pagoda, which is an Asian counterpart of Americanum there. Joe Pyeweeds is another plant that I've been literally took out of the grounds and brought it into the gardens. Hollow Joe Pyeweed, sweet Joe Pyeweed, bone set, even white snake root, rugosum in there. And I'm glad to see that Gateway 3 years ago made Sunny Borders catalog as kind of their showcase plant. Excellent plants, very drought tolerant too. Euphorbias in our rock gardens, of course, very resistant, as you might suspect. Queen of the Prairies, anybody grow the Queen of the Prairies and the European counterparts, the dropworts, the vulgaris types and things like this? Excellent. A lot of cultivated ones coming out. I've got variegated ones and things like this in the gardens and stuff. So your Philopendulus, I like this. That's a cultivated one. I like the traditional pink, very airy one. One of my favorite combinations is put Queen of the Prairie with Clematis jackmantii, that deep purple one, and have it actually run up through the Philopendula. It makes quite a, I should have put that slide on. It's on one of my other shows. Fennel, of course, an herb. Many herbs are very deer resistant. Gaillardia is a real old-fashioned blanket flowers. Not on my low maintenance list, not as long-lived as I would like it, obviously, but pretty resistant. Another one of my favorite ground covers, our native sweet woodruff there, very resistant. Wintergreen, our native wintergreen. If you've ever crushed a leaf and smelled it, you know how it gets its name. That's where oil of wintergreen used to come from. It's probably manufactured by chemicals today there. Anybody grow Gora? I can't grow it. You could probably grow it down here. Oh gosh, I grow it in containers. Lovely flower, fragrant flower, just beautiful. Very deer resistant, but zone 6. I have geraniums from all around the world, and I have some of my favorites. This is one of my favorites just because I like it, but also it's probably the most resistant of the geraniums to deer browsing, your big root geranium. Geums, rough avens and water avens and things like this, and your geums, again, not on my low maintenance list. Another one that after 3 or 4 years kind of starts petering out too, but a great plant. Horn poppy is very resistant. Status, right? Oh, your different statuses. Use dry flowers. Another old-fashioned perennial is very resistant. Never had a problem with that. Just baby's breaths, same sort of thing. Heleniums, native plants. It always amazes me. The Germans especially have taken our native plants, our goldenrods, our sneezeweeds, our sunflowers, and our fall sunflowers, hybridize them, and then send them back for these must-have perennials. Well, sneezeweed is a great native plant. I use it in both my meadow mixes, in my meadow gardens, and also in my formal gardens, especially some of the new, or not so new now, cultivars like Hoopsii and things like this that the Germans have cultivated. This is some of our perennial sunflowers. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that's in our perennial garden. That's that one I don't have a close-up that's a woodland sunflower. I'm a real fan of native sunflowers and have been using them more and more in the back of the mixed borders there. Hellebores, we collected hellebores from around the world in our Asian trips. That's a Niger type. I think that's white cheer or one of them. Hellebores are very, very resistant. If I had to pick my favorite hellebore, I like the evergreen Phoetidus, the stinking hellebore. It doesn't stink. It's got just a bad name. Hepaticas, both the round leaf and the sharp leaf hepaticas are very resistant. There it is in our native plant garden with little Dutchman's breeches and herb robert, that little miniature geranium and things like that that we put in there. Dame's rocket, a biennial. Some people think it's on some invasive list. It makes the best cut flower you want if you like it. Comes in every shade. I collect seed from pure white up to the real dark magentas and every shade in between. I must admit I use it strictly for bedding and for cut flower. It's excellent. Heucheras, oh gosh, that's in our, hard to say. You know all the heucheras and heucherellas, the combinations with the tyrellas, very resistant. That's our native alum root, but it's hard to see. So, hibiscuses, all your mallows. I grow a few different hibiscuses up there, and they're pretty resistant. One of my favorite native plants, golden seal. I love the fruit of them too. It looks like a big old raspberry sitting on top of it. Very important plant in colonial times and to Native American Indians, obviously. Wonderful plant. I don't know why it's not being used more in the woodland gardens. I use it quite a bit now. Your Aaronsbeard, your hypericums. Anybody grow hypericums? Boy, am I becoming a fan of these. They are in bloom all summer long. I treat them as, I cut them right back in there, but I really like hypericums. The foliage is green-blue, very resistant to deer browsing, and becoming one of my favorite plants, and that's what you get all summer long. Full sun for these hypericums. Ibises, obviously, you know them, very resistant candy tufts. Innulas, we collected from the steppes of Russia, Innula magnifica, one of the native sunflowers up there. Very cut foliage. That is one of the toughest plants I've ever seen. Never been watered after it was established, fertilized, no disease, no pest. Deer don't like it. I've got it growing from shade to full sun. And I'm now seeing it in the last few years on the market, Innula magnifica. I've had it for 27 years. Iris, I should remove this one. they get eaten. Here's another one we collected over in Asia. Is anybody growing Kurungashoma? Yeah, it's excellent. And that's an Asian collected wild specimen that's been there with no care year after year. It's in flower right now, late summer. Naudias, kind of a lax one. I interplant these with other things, but I like Naudia macedonias, another good. Your red hot pokers really make a show. Very resistant in there. Dead nettle, boy, what can I say about it? They'll grow any place. That's what I'll say about it. As will this. Yeah, but resistant, but watch it. They can get away from you, as you both know. What do we got? Oh, lavenders, of course. Liatris, our blazing stars, I really enjoy both spicata and cultivars of spicata and the pycnostachys and the cultivars, the white ones and things like this. That's in our low maintenance perennial bed there. Another Lychnis Maltese cross. Come on. Ligularias, things like the rocket and both dentata and the other ligularias. They like wet feet, though. They really enjoy moisture, as you know. Status, already, yeah. The true status. Linarias, toadflax, very resistant. Linum, your blue flax, I enjoy this plant, but again, not as long-lived. It didn't make my A-list, if you will. Here's a tough plant for you, both the variegated and the common one. This is what I underplant all my clematis with, cool the roots and things like this, tougher than nails. Lobelias, both great blue lobelia, cardinal flower, all the cultivars, even some of the other natives like Indian tobacco and spiked lobelia and things like this. Wonderful plants. They're not perennials, you know that. The original plant actually dies, but you get these little pups, if you will, coming up year after year. Not a real long-lived plant. Lupins, I'm becoming a real fan of lupins. I put them in my meadow gardens now. Lychnis, already talked about some of the campions, really like, that's in our gardens there. Lithrums, no. I won't say anything. Plume poppies, macleas, if you want a big, bold plant, that's things up 8 feet tall at the end of our arbor. One of my favorite hollyhocks is the miniature hollyhocks, Malva alsea. It's no rust diseases. Japanese beetles, it doesn't have those big leaves that they just attack and things like this. A horehound, another member in the things, as is lesumbalm. These mints and herbs and things like this are very resistant. Virginia bluebells, a harbinger of spring, obviously. Partridge berry, one of our woodland native plants. We do this. Bee balms, monardas. That's one of my favorites. I've grown Oswego tea and all the cultivars, and now there's many mildew-resistant bee balms out there, but that's fistulosa, wild bergamot. Roadside, you see this. Combine this with mountain mint, pycnanthemum, either muticum or tenuifolium, the narrowlith, one of my favorite combinations, and throw in a few butterfly weeds, and you've got one of the nicest. And dry, gravelly, hot soils, they love it. Sweet Cicely, another one of the herbs, very resistant. Nepidas, all your fascins, catmints, and all your other things are very resistant. Both your sundrops and evening primroses, your anotheras, are very resistant. Mondo grass, another one of my favorite ground covers. I've got a black one that is very handsome that I use. Marginal for me, but would do well for you down here. Very resistant. I grow a lot of prickly pears up in my gardens there, in my things, and people say, hey, it's cactus. Yeah, they do quite well up there. Oregano, obviously. Japanese Pachysandra, and I should have shown a shot of our native Pachysandra procumbens, the Allegheny spurge. I'd like it better than the damn Japanese stuff there. Peonies, we have collected wild peonies from all over the world. This is one called Duracum. It's a wonderful species peony that is very nice. As you know, peonies are very resistant. I have probably several hundred peonies. When you have peonies all in a cluster, botrytis, gray mold becomes a problem. I've got some real neat organic controls on the website for common diseases like black spot on roses and mildews on phlox and botrytis on peonies. Oriental poppies, I really like them. Unfortunately, they're here at Memorial Day and, and gone. But penstemon, beard's tongue, huskered red, perennial plant of the year some time ago. Cultivar of digitalis, the hairy beard's tongue there. Russian sage, you all know Perovskia's a real tough member. Phlomis, unusual plant. Not too many people grow this. It was an old-fashioned plant, kind of lost favor, but I like it. It's unusual. Phlox, all your different moss pinks and woodland phlox and all the other phlox. Obedient plant, physosteges, wonderful cultivars, vivid, pink bouquets, all the other ones. Very tough perennials. Balloon flowers, you all grow balloon flowers. You ought to see what they're doing with balloon flowers now. Of course, they have the white ones, but now the newer ones have speckled foliage. They're gorgeous. Kids get a kick out of it. Tougher, if I have cracks, I have these in my parking lot. If I have a crack in my asphalt, the next thing I know is here's a balloon flower coming up through there. Tough. May apple is just coming up in the spring. One of your, that's Brise d'Or, the variegated Jacob's ladder there. In there. Cinquefoils, potentillas, that's again not really a perennial. There are perennial potentillas. This is the fruticosa, the bushy cinquefoil, one of my favorite, very deer resistant, probably the most deer resistant plant that I have come across. In flower all summer long, great cultivars, things like Abbott's Wood, all the different yellows and oranges, right, and now the whole new generation of pink potentillas are out there. Primulas, don't recommend primulas. They're showing up on a lot of invasive plant lists because, boy, will they travel, if you have them where they like it, along water systems and things like this. That's cowslips. That's the European one, Virus there. Lungworts, of course. What can I say about lungworts? Harbinger of spring. Just watch where you site these. They're very prone to mildews if they're in kind of closed areas. There's part of our meadow there. That's the mountain mitts. That white one right behind, the big white one in the center. Yeah, that's what was in the Martha Stewart Living, or in that shot there. Yeah, deer resistant to a fault. That's where I wanted to really evaluate some of the best of the deer resistant plants, fronting the edge of those beds and grading it back to some of the Stewartias and things that we have behind it there. Your ranunculuses, of course, the cut flowers. This is not the garden ranunculuses. Boy, I like rotitibas, your prairie cone flowers, and all your native cone flowers are very resistant. Rogersias, we've got all 5 species of Rogersias collected wild, and I really enjoy them. If I had to pick my favorite, it'd probably be tabularis, the big leafed one. Now it's a stilbaloides. They keep on changing names on me there. Rudbeckias, I don't see one in the photograph. Coneflowers, yeah. Anybody grow nitida, your herbstone, the big ones that get up about 8 feet? Whatever. Your ruse, very resistant. Watch, a lot of people get an allergic reaction to ruse. Irish morse, I use a lot, or used to use a lot. Your perennial salvias, I won't go into those, I'm almost done. Bloodroot and all the double ones now that are out there, things like this. Santalinas I use in my herb garden, and you know, I can make knots and all sorts of things out of my Santalinas and things like that. Very tough plant, don't baby it. Saponarias, bouncing bets and your soapworts, I really like these plants. I use them a lot to spill over walls and things like this. Scabiosus, of course, old-fashioned perennial but very resistant. Scutellarias, yeah, native plants. I've been utilizing these in there. A lot of people associate these with weeds. I've got some of these in some of my meadows with some of my butterfly weeds, and they do quite well. Obviously, your hens and chicks. Senecio, Aurea, that's Aurea right there, perennial Senecio, ragworts, if you will. Alcea malvafolia, or miniature hollyhocks. Silphiums, compass plant and cup plant. Prairies, these things get up 8 feet, never need staking. I always tell kids when I take them through the gardens, the Plains Indians were never thirsty or lost because of silphiums. Cup plants, you can see big clasping leaves, they hold water. You could literally lean over on horseback and drink. The compass plant, which is Silphium lanceonatum, the lower leaves, instead of coming out horizontally from those big stems, come out on a vertical axis and align themselves to north-south. So, yeah, kind of a neat plant. Cicerynchiums, I have a native plant, low fields and things like this. I'm using this a lot in landscaping now. Wonderful, and I'm starting to see some cultivars out there. There's one of our meadows in front of our laboratory, goldenrods, what can I say, stackies. Celandine poppy, a real weed, but boy, I use this in my early spring shade gardens. Silphium comfrey's, another herb. Tansy, same thing, ditto. Telechia, this is a Asian sunflower that I came over in our collected wild trips. I'm just starting to see this on the market now. It is a wonderful sunflower from Asia. Your ruse, I love all the ruse, Roshburnianum, glaucum, all the other ones, very resistant. Your thymes, obviously. Tyrellas, your foam flowers, and all the cultivars. Trilliums, Trolliuses, your globe flowers. Your valorines are very ones. Your mullins, my gardeners, I'm not a fan of mullins. They're growing a lot of mullins in the garden. One of my favorite native plants, blue vervain. This thing is great. I've been using this more and more in garden designs. along with New York ironweed, Vernonia novaborsensis. There it is in our perennial gardens. It's in flower still. Labrador violet's one of my favorite violets. And there you have it. And I thank the Pleasantville Garden Club for inviting me to speak about perennials which show resistance to deer browsing. This talk and much more horticultural information is on our website at the Institute, which is www.ecostudies.org. Just click on the option on our homepage to visit our campus, and you will see selections for gardening and grounds on that page.